My name is Julie. RJ Julie is grateful to have you guys here, and we're happy to have Bill. Tonight we're here to welcome Bill Sisson and hear about his latest work, Seasons of the Striper. As a lifelong fisherman and skilled author, Bill takes us from Albemarle Sound in North Carolina right up to the Gulf of Maine in pursuit of the striped bass. He draws from 30 years worth of notebooks to tell us stories of wild pursuits, seasonal happenings, and lifelong friendships. You can tell in the writing that this work is deeply personal to him. And whether you call it a striper, line sider, or rockfish, I'll bet these journeys will feel personal to you too. Please join me in welcoming Bill.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming and helping me celebrate my first book, Seasons of the Striper. I want to do a couple of readings tonight, and before I get started, I want to thank a couple of people. First of all, I want to thank my wife, Patty. Where's Patty? Sitting right there. Patty was the primary editor, the first editor on the book, and as a wife and an editor, she could tell me when something really wasn't working, some of the guys I worked with, wouldn't want to be so blunt, but Patty was pretty blunt. This just doesn't work. So that was good. And I owe her thanks because I confiscated or commandeered the dining room table for 9 months. The right place. A pretty little house, so she was happy when the book was finally done and could shove me in an office somewhere. But I also want to thank the Rizzoli crew, Jim Richette, Jessica Knapp, and the others for everything they've done. Jim believed in the project and greenlighted it, and it's been a good relationship. I also want to thank my colleague Dan Harding, who's here and supported the idea all along, and certainly the folks from RJ Julia. Been great. So welcome and thank you. I made my living for more than 40 years writing and editing stories for a bunch of marine magazines. And at the same time, I had this idea to write a book about stripers. It's got to be 25 years ago anyway. But, in thinking about it today, or thinking about it just a few years ago, it was just, it wouldn't have been the same book had I written it then that it turned out today, certainly. So I needed that extra time. And 10 years ago, and particularly 10 years ago, I helped launch a new magazine called Angler's Journal. It's a quarterly, has really nice paper, nice photographs, heavy stock, and these are a couple of covers. But anyway, I learned a lot in producing this book, and really Seasons of the Striper is a direct descendant of that experience. Just working with big photos, nice paper, and focusing on aesthetics as much as the prose made a big difference. What was I going to say? There's been, and I've got most of them, there's been plenty of books, good books written about striped bass, but really not one that's quite like this in terms of the photographs. So this is a nice change. And I really felt that the fish, as well as the people who pursued it, deserved a book that captures that world and the way it is, the way it really looks, the way it really feels. So much of the fish world is kind of maybe not doctored photo, but they use a lot of models and they use a lot of kind of glam shots. So this book has nice photos, but we tried to make them all authentic and really kind of capture what that feels like, and also to capture the sense of being in that wonderful landscape. The salt marshes, the salt ponds, the barrier beaches, the rips, the big thundering surf. So the book was, we tried to work through the seasons, and we tried to give, as much as we could to the surf and to the boat experience. There's more surf shots because, the boats just don't look as good in photographs. Anyway, it's a world that, I kind of know exactly, from my perspective, I know exactly what it looks like, and I know what it feels like. It's been a big part of my life, and I wanted to capture that and put it into this book. So that's kind of the background on it. And I want to do a few readings. I want to start with one talk about, actually it's in the first chapter, which is called The Education of a Bass Bum. And that's me. So, can anybody hear me all right? Good. In a host of ways, stripers have defined me. They provide purpose, vigor to my after-world life, my after-work life. Stripers guided me to my fishing partners who became lifelong friends and determined when and where I took vacations, how I spent my money, and when I'd be home. They shaped my ideas of loyalty, secrecy, toughness, and endurance. Not turning in early, never saying, not tonight, I'm too tired. And catching them is just plain fun. The old timers taught me to keep my ears open, my mouth closed, and my bragging muzzled. The important stuff, the where, when, how catching was shared among a small cadre of close friends. And striped bass continue to lure me into the loveliest waters in New England, the salt ponds and bays, the breaking surf, the sand flats and shoals, ocean reefs, rocky shores, mussel bars, and the bony waters beneath island cliffs. Current, fog, wind, and darkness, the landscape has shaped the fish and molded me as well. I sit on a beach log in early October and listen to a conversation the southwest breeze is having with the young flood. The small swells answer, and the terns carry the tune a little further with their dips and dives and cries. Windy light sweeps the bluffs, beach grass and waves, and my small corner of the world catches its breath and comes alive. It's as if I've waved a wand. All the players, from the wind and tide to predators and prey to myself, are held together like atoms in a chemical bond, possibly unbreakable and without any reason to disconnect. I work my way west. Ribbons of baits slide nervously inside and outside the breakers. I fish a series of small bars in a cove by a lighthouse. The bluefish are just outside the bar and the bass are feeding inside. Over a span of 90 minutes, I catch and release 6 fish, 3 bass and 3 blues, by casting steadily, even when nothing is showing. Twilight rises from the east and finds me momentarily seated on the same rock wall where I fished so many years ago. Looking back, I scarcely remember the boy whom I pulled from my memory. As I see him casting from the wall, I suddenly realize that I miss him. It surprises me. I don't think about the boy at this age very often. He is young and eager and lonely. Where did he go? I wonder what happened to his dreams. How things turned out. Did they turn out the way he hoped? Then the fish begin to explode in front of me. I drop my notebook into my backpack, pick up my rod and wade out into the gray light. It's probably a good thing. I need to visit the boy again, but first I need to tango with the fish that brought both of us here to begin with. So, that's the first one. You know, when you're young, it's all about the fish. Biggest fish, the most fish, the best fight, when we're going to catch more fish. And then when you get a little bit older, like me and Reed Austin here, you know, you realize that it's also about the people you fish with and the places you fish with, and that becomes, you know, equally important. So the next reading is going to be about the partners I fished with in that same kind of theme. A special bond forms between people who spend hundreds of hours together pursuing line sighters from small boats and beaches in the middle of the night. I've relied on a partner's judgment while threading around rocky shores, setting up difficult drifts, or parsing the lights on commercial vessels. I suspect it's easier to find compatibility in love or business than it is in a fishing wingman. How many people are happy freezing their backsides off in a rocking boat at midnight November, or meeting at streams at 3:25 long before the first tweets of birdsong to catch bait? Unlike marriage, fishing unions are not meant to be lifelong affairs, though the friendships often outlast the fishing. The hours are tough, especially when you're working full-time and have a family. On plenty of days, you spend more time with your fishing partner than your life partner. I've been lucky. I've had 4 fishing partners in 50 years, and each has been wily, tough, and dependable. I remain friends with Larry, Wayne, Bruce, and Chris, even after they've swallowed the anchor, moved away, or taken up other pursuits. From the surf or boat, we have all learned to step lightly, move quietly, keep a low profile, bend with the wind and tide like the eelgrass meadows, and disappear into the night and fog and the troughs between the waves. Author Isak Denison calls it the art of moving gently. There's more than a frontier spirit in those who pursue striped bass hard over 3 seasons. Each man I've fished with has what author Wallace Stegner describes as the mongrel smartness of Huck Finn, the hard-won native intelligence gained not from books, but from experience, from doing and seeing firsthand. All of us were good at keeping secrets. We didn't brag outside of our cadre of trusted mates, and we never drew unwanted attention. We didn't even paint the name on our boats so that we would be hard to remember from the people who fished beside us. We gave up nothing. We'd pull off a good lightly fished spot if another boat appeared. If we had a fish on, we'd lower the rod tip, we'd loosen the drag, and thumb the spool until the boat moved on. We pointed and feigned interest in some fiction happening 100 yards away to draw attention away from what we were doing. I think I tried that with you, didn't I, Lana? Point over there, point, you know. All of us were home on the water. 3 of my fishing friends have owned boats, and the 4th is a surf fisherman who, because he grew up with a surfboard as I did, is part seal. We made each other better anglers and better boatmen. We have endlessly chased stripers to Timbuktu, foregoing sleep and enduring the wrath of those at home and work to indulge our passion, even after it bloomed into a full-blown obsession. All of it was magic while it lasted. Sadly, it never lasts. As predictable as the tides, life changes and friends drift apart. I count myself as fortunate in that I've always been able to pick back up with my fishing pals as if nothing has changed. The older I get, the more I appreciate them. And it's certainly not about perfection. It's about the quirky traits, idiosyncrasies, and ingenuity that suit people like us in pursuing this worthy fish. Over time, most of the fish we caught have faded from memory, but my partners somehow remain ageless, as spry, eager, and hungry in my remembering as we were when first we began the chase. So, good guys all. One of those guys has since passed away just a couple of months ago. He was the first guy that really introduced me into fishing. He was a senior in high school, and I think I was in 8th or 9th grade. And the seniors had control of the back seats in the bus. And that's the way it was, and everybody else had to sit somewhere else. So I heard him talking about stripers, and I needed a mentor. And one day, I bided my time and I waited till he was sitting in that back seat by himself, and I jumped right in and I said, hi, and my my brother's Pete, you know him a little bit, and I just started talking about fish, and we hit it off. It turns out his father had died that year, so which I didn't know, and he was handling some of those difficult things. So he needed somebody like me who just wanted to fish, didn't ask a lot of tough questions. So we hit it off, and he was the first one to sort of open the secrets to me to fishing. So that was cool. I am now going to read a little bit about some family background of mine. So a lot of my forebears on my father's side were commercial fishermen. And they seine netted for striped bass off the beach. A lot of them, some of them oystered, they scalloped, I know they lobstered, and whatever else they catch, I'm not sure. There wasn't a lot of information about them, and a lot of the information I found was in their obituaries, but I'll tell you a little bit about them. My grandfather, William Bernard Sisson, was a surfman in the U.S. Life-Saving Service, forerunner of the Coast Guard, and was stationed in both Quanticontag and Point Judith, Rhode Island. He and his mates kept watch over the coastal waters, launching pulling boats to rescue distressed mariners. On the side, he was a commercial fisherman for striped bass, and he was a professional gambler. That was one of those end of deathbed confessions that an aunt told my mother. Oh, Bernie was a gambler. I believe it because when my father was born, they had to find him. She was having a difficult breech birth, and they pulled Bernie out of a card game somewhere in town. So there weren't many stories, but that was one. My great grandfather, also named William Sisson, was himself no stranger to risk on and off the water. The eldest Sisson was, according to his obituary, one of the youngest Union soldiers in the Civil War. Too young to enlist legally in Rhode Island when the war broke out, he instead went to New Hampshire, added a few years to his age, and joined a cavalry regiment under another name. He lost a leg on a battlefield in Virginia and returned to Rhode Island to make a living as a commercial fisherman. A photo shows him on the beach, standing with a cane in each hand, trouser leg pinned up, net strewn on the sand, pipe between his teeth. He levels the same hard look displayed by family members across the generations. They're etched in my memory and in photographs. My great-grandfather and his sons, commercial fishermen all, had long, sad, windburned faces. Many of them didn't start out tough, I suppose, but they were eventually tempered by their circumstances. My great-uncle Ed Sisson was another Rhode Island seine netter, known for his keen ability to smell stripers before he could see them. At 76, he died in the surf, hauling in a heavy seine, literally with his boots on. Such were the times. I'll just take a break for a second. You know, there's an interesting story. When I grew up, my mother knew him, and she'd go down in like Weekapaug, Rhode Island, and watch him launch the boats and set the nets. So she'd tell the story about, you know, your uncle would be sitting up in the dunes, and he'd whistle and wave his hands, and the guys would push the boats out. So she told it so vividly that I grew up thinking that I'd seen it, you know. So I remember asking my brothers, "Do you remember Uncle Ed? Did you see?" "No, I don't think I remember Uncle Ed." When I finally found his obituary, you know, he'd passed before I was even born. So it's one of those things with memoir writing. You have to always be checking, because that was not a real memory, but she told it so strongly that I believed it. The thumbprints of these swamp Yankees still mark their descendants, revealed in their stoicism, independence, and hard bark. They bear no buttery sentimentality. We are all our father's children. My father was frugal his entire 91 years, long after there was any reason to go without. It's fall, and I'm imagining William B. Sisson riding beside me in my skiff as the wind strengthens and the seas build with the flood. My family has worked these waters for generations. I skirt the empty rip and study the sea in the fading light. It's bigger and steeper than I'd hoped. No other boats are working the reef this week. I'm fishing alone except for the old timer in my head. To keep the bow from getting knocked sideways, I drifted under power with one hand working with the throttle and the wheel, and the other one holding the fishing rod. I've fished that way before. "You can make it through there," he whispers. "You're not going to get any fish unless you get back in there anyway. You know that. The fish are in the second or third wave." My grandfather's right. A surfman and a gambler, he knows about playing the odds and taking chances. There's little to be gained by nibbling around the edges. I know exactly where the fish are lying. Either I go in after them or I pack up and go home. I've got the gold pocket watch with his initials carved on the back. I have his name, and like it or not, I've inherited that little bit of wiring that connects us to our past. Like my dad missing his dead father, I too have spent my life looking over my shoulder for the ghost of this waterman, chasing him here until we meet on this windy night with a foaming rip spread out in front of us. It looks and feels fishy. The calendar and tide suggest the same. And here he is, the swamp Yankee, standing beside me, talking in my ear. "Go ahead, boy," he says. "Get back in there. There's fish to be caught. You can make it. Move." So, those are my swamp Yankee relatives. My father had the same, my father wasn't much of a fisherman, but he had the same attitude. They were all kind of children. He was a child of the Great Depression, so. The last one I'm gonna read, I don't know how we're doing on time. 7:25. You know, the season's winding down now, as everybody knows. John just pulled his boat, right? But Reed's gonna fish tomorrow night. So, hope springs eternal, you know, we're gonna keep going. But this is a tough time of year, and November usually spells the end of it. So this is one about the end of the season. I like it out here in the dark, on a beach, in a boat, or among familiar rocks reflecting the last vestiges of fall. This is when I'm living close to my bones, hallowed and hollowed out. Cold wind pouring from the north and everything shutting down. Creatures winging southwest, fleeing for deeper water, boring in the mud. The Germans have a word for the seasonal restlessness, Zuckenruhe. It's unmistakable in animals that are forcibly prevented from migrating, especially birds. Think of a raptor in a cage, longing for flight but going nowhere. In late November, the beach is steep, windy, and lonesome. Dusk slopes into night, nothing slow or gentle about it. When I was younger, such emptiness unsettled me. With age and experience, I've come to relish the long shadows in the heavily textured sea, full of moguls and wind. In the words of Joyce Carol Oates, gone is the ripe sun-warm smell of summer pears, replaced by the pungent odor of decay in salt marshes, tidal rivers, and the piles of seaweed pushed up on the beach by a storm. Fall is hard and heavy as an anvil. It helps to have a bit of sand, a pinch of downright cussedness in your constitution, to quote my late swamp Yankee Nana. Every boat in the harbor has been hauled, the mooring balls replaced by winter sticks. Frost coats my windshield and eel cooler. Mine is the last car in the parking lot, the last house in the neighborhood where leaves are still unraked. The seaside town where I fish has hung holiday decorations from the light poles. Snow squalls beat down in the late afternoon. The big flakes fly horizontally like insects on the north wind. By the third day of gales, it's the day that the season is kaput. The end is marked by the smell of damp wool socks, the weird cacophony of yips and howls from a pack of coyotes calling up the moon from behind the marsh, the whistle from a night train across the bay. You are wet, cold, and alone. You pull your watch cap over your ears and sink into your coat. It's hard to feel anything but insignificant next to the dark water, sand, and boulders. One fish would change all that. You stay for the chance to catch just that one last fish of fall. So. That's it. Thank you very much. Questions? I'm happy to.
I've been a striped bass fisherman since I was in my teens. And I always relied on bucktail to cast and retrieve. So it was a calamari, I guess, right?
Mhm.
To the fish. Is that still efficient, or is there a better?
Is there a better bucktail?
Yeah,
There's plastic swim baits today, which function probably the same way. And, you know, they imitate the peanut bunker that's around, probably better. So I
can you
would
specify something?
like what they call it? The tsunamis, I think.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay,
So all these swim baits, so it looks like a peanut bunker, it even has a dot on its side. They come in different sizes, single hook. They cast well, and you can catch, depending, but you can catch half dozen or more fish before you have to replace one.
okay. Can I do a follow?
Yeah.
I have caught striped bass off of Nantucket on the east end, 25 pounds. I put them back. Can you gauge the age of a striper?
I think you can. I mean, they live to over 30 years old. They're not really sure, you know, how much more than
But
that.
they are, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
I should put them back as breeders?
you know, you have to because there's a slot limit. So that's probably over the slot.
Yeah. Okay,
So that went into effect, was it this year? The slot went into effect. So the problem was, you know, they had a minimum size that the fish had to be larger than, so that kind of regulation kind of penalizes the faster growing fish, because they get cropped off first.
Right.
So to have they have a slot now, and it goes up to, has to be up to 35 inches, but under 35 inches, and almost all the stripers over 35 inches are females, and they're, they lay millions and millions of eggs, and their eggs and fry are a lot more viable than the smaller fish. So even though some of those spawners will be taken with the current slot limit, it protects an awful lot of other fish.
You think that, that class fish in that slot are getting wiped out by so many people taking a specific year of fish? You know what I'm saying?
I think they're all right with the slot. I think they just need to give it some time to see what happens.
What happens,
Yeah. Because it's a big improvement over a minimum size.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
But now I'm seeing it's just limiting to that size fish. That
Right.
are just gonna keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah, but at least
It's better than that, yeah.
let the bigger ones get through, and those
Yeah.
are the ones they really need to get back on the spawning grounds.
So Bill, your absolute favorite geographic location that you've ever fished? Your favorite on East Coast?
We fished, I went to Cutting for 18 years in a row. With, for vacations and bring the kids, and we'd have a kids fishing derby during the day. On little schoolies and stuff, and then get them to go to bed and put them, and then I'd go out at night and fish. That's still good fishing, because the guy who's on the cover, Jerry Odette, still fishes Cutting a lot. He wasn't out there when I was fishing it regularly, but that was a spot, and it wasn't like a million years ago, but there weren't many people fishing there at all. Most people still came over, and there was some surf fishing, and they were hired. The typical guys that went out and fished the Sow and Pigs Reef, but that was really good fishing. And it changed, because of the size of the fish there and how they'd run into the bottoms and rub their faces and heads against it. I redid all my tackle, upgraded all to heavier line, stiffer rods, and heavier leaders. So when you get a fish like that and you dive right down, but then you drill it, just crank, and you'd have to kind of haul them out of the weed. Everything would come in kind of chafed. Then you check the leaders, cut them back, put another hook on,
Yeah.
and go again. But hey, Reed.
That was a nice lead in, Bill. Thank you. Can you chat about Cutting Hook, where I could see it from my place for 30 years?
I know you. Yeah.
I fished it hard. You mentioned that your favorite place to fish was a rock all the way at the eastern point of the island. I'm not gonna ask you to pull out a map, but is that all the way out of Canapisset, or is that still on the island proper?
No, it wasn't near Canapisset.
You said it was the easternmost point of the island. My favorite was the western point, so we were
I might have been fibbing to you. I don't know. It was on the,
It's the other rock, right?
it's the other rock.
Yeah, we're good.
It was surprising. It was on the north side of the island, so it's not where you would expect it to find it.
Okay.
But, the south side, when you get hammered by big winds and
Yeah,
stuff
yeah,
and surf, it was a
yeah.
tough place to
That's
fish.
it,
And I
yeah.
fished
Yes.
out there by myself, except maybe for once or twice. So I scouted in the daytime. I'd swim out to a rock, climb on it, and start to fish and see, just to see if I could get back on to it at night. So, how can I get on it? What's the handhold like? Can I stand on the rock? And I got washed off a lot of rocks in the daytime. It was fun. It was, but it was tough fishing, and it still is. So in some big blows, when it was too tough to fish that windward side of the island, I started to fish the other side, and I found a couple of rocks, and the fish came in there really well. So I was able to focus on catching big fish there without many people around. But you really have to scout. It's like anything. You have to put the time in and all that. But I didn't write about Cutting. I can do the book a little bit but our last couple of years there were more people coming out. There were some fishing clubs and stuff, and it's good to see people fishing. You just, they would get out there early enough to grab a rock like an hour before dark, and the fishing starts at dark, and it's like, it wasn't what I wanted to do anymore. To have to get in line and take a number to catch a fish, so. But there's a lot of fish now in Canada, they're not
Yeah.
real big yet, but there's the fishing up there is incredible. in Brunswick, from what I understand. Those fish will get bigger, they have a lot of bait. Unfortunately, they've moved the salmon out of the Miramichi, they've eaten a lot of the salmon smolt, so they're causing a bit of a problem, but everything seems to be drifting east with the warming water, you know. And Cutty used to have a lot of lobsters and, you know, and there were a lot of lobstermen there, and a lot of these fish that I was catching were what they call kind of grubbing along the bottom. They're eating lobsters and crabs at night. And even at low tide, they were in those rocks, and I was fishing mostly eels. And it was, you know, there were big fish eating big crustaceans, and you'd see the little lobsters with your light when you're climbing off the rocks, but those, you know, there's no more lobstering around Cutty on, speak of. You agree?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any experience or insight about Block Island?
No, not as much as a lot of people do. I mean, I knew the guys that fished there. I was good friends with Tim Coleman. Past he'd gotten, what did Tim get? He had a 68 pounder out there. And Pat Abate and some of those guys. Fished out there a little bit, but then it got crowded, and I started to go to Cutty and didn't find any people there, so.
Yeah, you can't fish it in the season, there's just too many people, but the
Yeah.
early season and the late season. And I fished it a lot in my life. And
Yeah.
I've noticed the last 5 years in particular, in the late season, very spotty. Yeah, I
Yeah,
used to do amazing in October in brutal weather,
yeah.
and it's been very spotty in the last 5 years. I'm just curious to know if you've been out there.
Yeah, I mean, I heard from a guy last year, a scientist who I quoted in the book, John Walden. He's a good fisherman and he's a striper expert, still is. He teaches at the University of New York. And they were really disappointed in what they found. Because they've been going out there for 15 years, same week, rent a house, fish hard, and
Yeah,
it really wasn't the same.
yeah, I've been getting that too.
But when it was good, you know, when those big sand eels were in, when did that been in the 80s, I think?
Yeah, well, even in the 90s, it would be
90s.
size and numbers, but
Yeah.
not in the last 5 to 8 years.
Yeah,
Still a gorgeous place,
it is.
especially when there's no people there.
Yeah. I know. The fish are funny because we used to fish a lot in the Connecticut River, and there were a couple little reefs there that really had big fish on them. And then the word got out, and then a lot of the fish got caught, and then, you know, big fish just didn't come back. So there's thinking among some fishermen that the fish have a fidelity to a certain spot or a certain reef. You know, they go to the Chesapeake or the Delaware or the Roanoke to spawn, and then every year they come back and hit sort of the same places. And if, you know, if you wipe out one of those groups that hit this particular spot or that particular spot, it could be quite a while before they, you know, another bunch kind of finds that place. I mean, the old timers, the charter guys are good. They'd take a party out. They knew where the fish were. They'd go over that good spot. They'd get a couple of keepers for them. And then they just slide off a little bit. The charter would know the difference. They'd save some for the next day, you know? So they kind of practice conservation in their own way. They wouldn't sit there and bail them all day. But we have a problem. I mean, I talked to a scientist right after the fishery came back. It was probably 1990. He was a Chesapeake guy. He was there for all the moratoriums. And I asked him what he thought the biggest danger was, biggest threat, you know. And he said, it's our inability to manage abundance. He said, you know, man's inability to manage abundance. We just don't do a good job at it. They were all patting themselves on the back about what a great job they did. They did a good job, but now we're back to an overfished stock, and we're having to put, you know, rules into place. And once again, you know, the spawning in the Chesapeake wasn't that good this year. So they're trying to protect these big ones so they can get enough on the spawning grounds of the Chesapeake in a year when environmental conditions lead to a good spawn, enough to get a dominant year class and rebuild the fishery. Because if the Roanoke and the Hudson and the Delaware, they can provide enough fish. There's no danger of the fish going extinct. There's going to be fish, but we're not going to have good fishing like we used to have until the Chesapeake gets on fire, because they used to provide like 70 to 90% of the fish on the East Coast. So we need that. And they've got problems on the spawning grounds, and they got low oxygen in the summer in deep water, and they've got some pollution, and you know. So that's always a roll of dice each year. But the thought is, you can get as many big fecund females on the spawning grounds and conditions turn out right, then bango, we can get a bonanza, you know, and then protect them again, hopefully. More? Charlie, what do you have to say?
Not really much of a fisherman
No?
myself.
We appreciate you coming
I
anyway.
just build the boats that you go out on.
More questions? No. Carl?
You answered it.
All right, well, thank you, Bill.
Well.